So hi Dan.
Hi Dean.
So I'm intrigued to discover more about the sun. You know, these beautiful rays that we're receiving right now. Especially after listening to your talk that you did with Rack and Darpan. It gave me a whole different perspective of our relationship to the sun. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about this new way of viewing the sun, not just something that we get sunburnt by or something that, you know, grows our veggies, but our relationship to the sun and at this particular time. You know, how is the your perception of the sun different to most?
Well, that's a good and interesting and potentially long question, but all our ancestors and ancestral cultures all had a very intimate relationship with the sun, for the most obvious reasons that it was supplying warmth and heat and light to grow our food, but also to drive all cycles: wind, wave, winter, summers, if you're outside of the tropics. And the differing relationships that different cultures had to the sun were, I guess, expressed some in Mesoamerica as epochs. So the first sun, the second sun, the third sun. We now at the dawning of what's called the sixth sun, or to some cultures the fifth sun. But essentially it's an epoch of a new understanding of what the sun is. So our current scientific understanding is that the sun's a glowing, exploding ball of helium and hydrogen, like a thermonuclear process. And this may be helpful on some levels, but it's actually very unhelpful on a living level, because on a living life level, whether you're a plant or an animal or a human or bacteria, the sun, when it's taken out of its living context, is just seen as another thing. In this case, it's a very important thing, but you know, like all chemical processes will run and at a time die. Now that may be millions or billions of years away, but there's another group of people who perceive the sun as a dynamo spinning in a plasma, and so the light phenomenon we see is electromagnetic phenomenon, just like your light bulb is an electromagnetic phenomenon that gives you that light. And what that means is the relationship between the sun and the earth may be quite different to what we perceive. In other words, as an earth, we may not be just the perfect amount away from the sun to receive the right heat just to grow. There may actually be a much more closer dynamic, closer to what we call love. So, for example, if the earth and sun were lovers, and indeed they are, then if there was a situation where your lover entered the room, you may blush or heat up in her presence. She may not be heating you directly, but you would heat up in relationship to her. And so this is much more the relationship between the sun and the earth. And if you step back outside of our solar system and you look at the sun, you would see that the earth is still in the heliosphere. In other words, we're still in the sun itself. And the energy is flowing not only from the sun to the earth, but from the earth to the sun. And so if you look at some of the other solar beings, like plants, you'll see they all grow in these spirals, and the spirals get tighter and tighter, and then they become flowers, and then the flower, those leaves, as they transmute, they become colorful, and then they sometimes produce fragrance, and color, and they then would send that energy back to the sun.
Yeah.
In other words, Goethe and Steiner, looking at Goethe's work, would see how this relationship was not only expressed in the involution, but also the evolution. So the way in which light is enchanted into matter, and then the way that matter then is etherealized, spiritualized, and then liberated back to the sun. And so each one of us as humans has the opportunity to take that light in a particular way, and the way in which we trap it, the way in which we garden with it, so to speak, determines whether it upgrades, and then ultimately what we do with that will determine whether when we send it back it's of a higher level than we received it or lower level. And so if you take the modern human within that context, you will see that we have opportunities on all levels to do this. So for example, food, how we grow our food, whether we grow it with or without chemicals, whether we grow it under lights or whether we grow it in the sun, whether the soils are fertile or not, all will determine the quality of food, which is really the quality of sunlight. And that quality of sunlight then determines the quality of our thoughts, the quality of our health of our body, the quality of our emotions, the quality of our spiritual life. And so then we can see why all our ancestors were so enamored by the sun.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that it seems like we've forgotten that, you know, and our ancestors, the Mayan cultures, the various cultures that worship the sun, still had that direct connection with the sun and knew those things.
Well, this is exactly right. So the great disconnection that occurred was when modern cultures moved from hunter-gathering through agriculture and pastoralism to an industrial age. It enabled them to disconnect from the land and the sun. And this is a very dangerous place to go, because we get all of our energy from the sun. The denial of the sun, or the turning of the sun into something dangerous, sets a very dangerous precedent, when in fact the body is photosynthetic. So it's been shown now scientifically that not only are we receiving light through our eyes and capturing light in our retina, but right now as the sunlight is hitting my skin, the infrared is penetrating, and it can penetrate up to 30 centimeters, in other words, right through my body. And all my cells and all the organs are designed to capture light and to use that light, and to use it to build cellular tissue, to use it to do all the cellular processes that keep the body alive. Now this is kind of quite controversial, but this is very important. And what enables us to do this is a cell organelle that is bacterial in origin. And this is, I guess this is crucial to the way in which light is trapped or enchanted into matter on our planet, and how it's moved around, and then how ultimately it's liberated.
So people actually absorbing this sunlight energy through their eyes as well, yeah, like doing sun gazing in the early
Sure,
moments.
but it's not even sun gazing, it's everything you look at. So if I'm looking at a plant, what am I seeing? I'm seeing the green light coming off that plant. That means the plant is absorbing all the other colors, the reds and the blues, and what it's reflecting is the green. So I'm energetically or vibrationally absorbing not only the color, but the shape of the object that's reflecting off or radiating off. So on the surface of a plant, the surface of the leaf, you'll have these things called chloroplasts, and in the chloroplasts you have so this is where the photosynthesis takes place. So they're microbes that have joined in to the cellular tissue, and they capture sunlight in what's called photosynthesis, and they store it in sugar batteries. And that then becomes our food, our medicine, our building material, our firewood, fuel. And so if we eat a plant, there are microbes in our stomach which will digest that plant. And then once it goes into the cellular tissue, it's recognized as food, and then our cell will pull that sugar into its cell. And then there's other cell organelles, which again are bacterial in origin, and they'll then crack that bond, that ATP bond, and liberate the energy, like liberate little packages of sunlight on a cellular level. So the microbes control the metabolic pathway. They capture the light, package it, move it, and then it's cracked open. But it's after it's cracked open and animates the living tissue of our body or an animal's body is where it gets really interesting. What do we do with that energy?
Yeah,
do we go chase Pokemon? Or, you know, do we use that energy in a way that recognizes not only where it came from, but honors, respects, and returns that love? So this is the cultures that have unfolded out of there: the singing, the dancing, the ritual, the ceremony, all the exploration of living energy through plant culture and animals, and our relationship as curators walking on the earth will then take that energy and liberate that back to the sun. And we may look at the monuments that our ancestors have built, whether it's Stonehenge or pyramids, as forms of initially of recording the movements of the sun, then as temples to the sun, but then ultimately as ways of focusing our localized suns, which I'll get into in a second, which is the heart. And once those all fire up, we could use these temples or these monuments to then return the sunlight to its source at a higher frequency. And then it enables us to receive higher informational, upgraded light information, and cycle that higher and higher or lower and lower. And so humans, as part of the curators of the planet, get to curate that light in how they live. In other words, their relationship with themselves, the soil, the water, and the sun will determine whether cultures and civilizations flourish or fall.
Okay, so it's obviously important to recognise that process, to deepen our relationship with the sun, and therefore allow those processes to happen within us and within the environment.
Absolutely, and this is, if you look back, this is what our ancestors were doing and continue to do, but without the right eyes, it's hard to see. So whether you're in the Amazon or whether you're in the jungles of Malaysia or for that matter, the deserts of southern Africa, all the cultures, our ancestors that came before us, had this beautiful dance between themselves and the natural world. And of course, the most enigmatic mover of the natural world was the sun, because it was the rising and falling of the sun, or the spinning of the planet, whichever way you want to look at it, which gave us the cycles of rest and recuperation and the expenditure of energy. And so if you were gathering plants, let's say, for food or medicine, it would be natural to gather them when there was light, you know. So all of nature is tuned to this movement of the sun and the sap rising and falling in plants. You know, the plants capturing that sunlight in the sugar during the day and then pushing it into the roots at the night, feeding the underworld with these sugars, and then microbes at nighttime feeding the plants with nitrogen. The nitrogen is the chemical, so to speak, of spirit. And so the nitrogen, as that's in the plant, that animates the plant. That turns the plant into the boundary between plant and animal. And so the most powerful psychoactive plants, for example, are plants that use this nitrogen. They become nitrogen beings, and then they employed to animate that spirit in the body. And then so you can look through all these different cultures, whether it's drinking ayahuasca or San Pedro or acacias. What they're doing is they are interacting with these nitrogen beings. Now, from a light perspective, our role, you could say, as being humans, is how effectively we capture light and use it for valuable or meaningful process on the planet before we return it at a higher frequency. So that brings me to the heart. And Steiner, when he did his biodynamic lectures, he recognized that he was talking to rooms full of people who were kind of falling asleep. They could watch him and hear his words, but there wasn't enough cognitive power to really grasp what he was saying. And so he recognized that even back then, in the 30s and 40s, that what was going on was the soils were starting to degrade, and that because the plants grown on those soils didn't have the nutritional density, that humans eating that weren't getting enough proper nutrition to be conscious properly. And so he introduced the biodynamic lectures to re-energize the soils, to re-energize the plants and animals and humans to become awakened in their body, in the physical world.
And that relates also to the sun, the whole biodynamics, isn't it? This is like capturing
absolutely
elements of the sun.
It's the dance between the sun and the earth, and how humans, plants and animals are essentially like midwives. You know, how if you take just for example the extreme of the difference between, let's say, a forest and a desert. You know, a desert, because it doesn't have plants, which are these standing columns, living columns of water, a desert will get really hot during the day and really cool at night. In other words, you have these extremes of temperature. Now those extremes relate to moisture and a whole bunch of other factors. So if you start to grow plants, which are these living columns of water, it clips the temperature, so it won't get as hot during the day and it won't get as cool during the night. So any other creatures living in that system will need to use less and less energy to regulate their temperature. And less energy getting, whether it's cooler in the day or hotter at night, that liberates that energy for them to spend more time gathering food. If you're a bird or an animal, or if you're a human, it gives you more time to develop culture. And so our modern cultures have created a level of energy poverty that forces us all to work all the time, so we become slaves. We, unlike our ancestors that could probably gather food for 2 hours a day and have all the rest of the time as leisure, we end up having to work our whole time and hardly have any leisure. And so we may seem to ourselves in an illusion to be richer, but actually we don't have the time to enjoy that leisure. We don't actually experience the richness of life and culture that our ancestors have. So in an overall energy spectrum, there's way more poverty now than there was in our ancestors' time. So the big question remains is, how do we move back to a better balance of a solar culture without destroying what we've got up to now, but without letting go of these beautiful lessons that our ancestors brought to us and taught us. So this is the big challenge of our times. The challenge of our times are really, how do we cultivate harmonic relationships with the living world in such a way that our living on the planet is better for all. There's a constant upgrading of energy, there's more abundance, there's more biodiversity, there's more fertility. This is determined by how humans live their life. And the primary relationship is between me and myself, and that unfolds to me and my family or my community, which is the plants, animals and humans, and me and the earth, which then is inextricably linked to me and the sun. And each one of us has a local sun, and that local sun is the heart. And the heart can function on many different levels or dimensions. On its most base level, it may just be a type of pump which pumps our blood around. But what we could see is that very early on, there was a split in the way in which energy was processed between what we call the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. And one mob ended up becoming these green beings capturing light, and the other mob, these red-blooded beings, which was processing that light and liberating it back. In other words, we form a union, the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. The one is enchanting light into physical form, and the other is digesting that light and liberating it back to spirit. And so this sacred circle, or this sacred processing of light, is what humans as curators have done through time, is plant forests or look after forests, and then that looks after all the other beings. And the way in which we do that is to connect, and the way in which we connect is through the heart. And when we're in love, which is our highest expression of the body, then our heart becomes like a sun. In other words, that radiant energy that we see captured in the artworks of showing a Buddha with, with a radiant light around the heart and the head, or a Christ being, what they're showing is that being has tapped into its own source of energy, which is infatigable, which we call love. And the radiance is literally the radiant energy field that body then radiates. And any being that comes into that field can tap into that energy without any diminishing of the source, just like the sun. So if we put 10 million solar panels and we're capturing sunlight, the sun is not diminished. Okay, if anything, the worship of the sun increases not only the brightness, but the coherence of the sun. In other words, the quality of the vibrational living information that the sun then radiates. But because each one of us is an expression of that sun, when we're in love, we can create our own radiance that our plants, animals, families, and ourselves, our body, benefits from. And it's inexhaustible. In other words, the more love we're radiating, the more love, the clearer that flow of energy, the more love we able or capable of radiating. And so it's more like a muscle. It gets practiced. The more we use it, the more love we share, the more love that's shareable. And so if we look carefully then through this lens at all the cultures that had come before us, we see that this is exactly what they were doing. The celebration of these flows of food, of these flows of nature, whether it was the flooding of the Nile or the flowering of some plant, or these flows of the natural world, whether they would be migratory herds of animals like buffalo. All of them were tuned into these cycles, or this dance between the sun and the earth, and the elements being the interface.
So just on that, tuning in between the sun and the earth, in next month on the 22nd of September is the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere, and I plan to be in Kalkan to experience the equinox event where Quetzalcoatl appears.
Yes.
So it seems like a big effort to make a pyramid to create these shadows, unless they were really onto something here. I mean, what
right.
do you feel they're honouring when they're, you know, in that building of the temple just for these equinox ceremonies?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So we see this symbol. Well, it's not a symbol. It's a mythology through all different cultures, and that is the feathered serpent in Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, is this embodiment. It's like the rainbow serpent. Now, the reason it's a feathered serpent is because it's a combination of the bird tribes or the bird energy and the reptile, the snake. Now, the snake as a being, because it doesn't have legs, is connected intimately to the earth and is associated with the living earth energy, the energies of the physical world and our body. And the bird, because it can fly, is associated with the spirit energies, or the heavenly realms, let's call them. And so the dragon, or the feathered serpent, is literally the combination between these two beings, or these two archetypal energies. The earth meeting heaven. So when we see the appearance of Quetzalcoatl, it's heaven on earth. Now, the beings that bring about heaven on earth, the beings that are responsible for speeding that journey or for midwifing that journey, are the humans. It's in their ceremony, it's in their dance, it's in their honoring of the earth, it's in the honoring of the elements, of the mountains, of the oceans, of the rivers, of the forests, of all the animals, of all their support system. In other words, everything in the physical world, this world and the underworld, is all supporting this body. And then everything from these unseen worlds is also supporting the body, and it's those two, that heaven meeting earth. And it's in that crescendo, it's in that climax, it's in that thin film around the surface of the planet where all the action is. And that's where humans get to cultivate. That's where culture comes from. It's how we interact with all these other living beings, so that there's a constant, let's call it evolution, but a constant involution of this light, and the using of the light for higher and higher purpose, and then the liberation of that light back to its source. So maybe the time that we're coming into now, this time of the sixth sun, is a reawakening of our understanding of what the sun is as a living emanation of love or light, and how each one of us is an expression of that through the activation of the heart as the cognitive center rather than the brain. See, we've got the three main cognitive centers. We've got the gut, the solar plexus, and then we've got the head. And so these three cognitive centers, but the central one combines the best of the logic processing cognitive center with the brain, with its two hemispheres, the left and right, up or down, right or wrong, black or white, the dualistic world of logic, which has gotten us into such a mess because that has become the primary cognitive organ, whereas the actual true cognitive organ, which we should all be referring to, is the heart. We can use the emotional energy of the gut because that plugs into the whole underworld and the knowing of the natural world, of Sophia, of the goddess, and combine it with this logic processing, but it's the two where they join in the heart, which is the true functionality of human beings living in harmony. So our ancestors set the stage for this time. Now we've gone off and expanded the mind to the degree, but because it's disconnected, it now needs to come back and re-plug in to the heart, and the way it does that is through the gut. It's by digesting our landscapes. you know. And so now we're coming to the point in time, let's call it the time of the sixth sun, where we all awaken in love, and we then start to celebrate through ceremony that awakening. And then we realize that our ancestors have already set the stage by building these beautiful pyramids and these stone circles and these landscapes. These sacred mountains and temples have already been built through time, and they will then harness that sun energy, which is the local sun energy, which is the heart of awakened humans, and they will then braid that together and then send it back to the sun. And at that point, the recognition or the awakening of humans becomes complete, because now the cycle's complete. And then the next messages that come from our great central sun through our sun, which is like a local ISP, will be the next evolution or the next golden age. So we're at the threshold. And right now, when you look at the world, it could go just horribly wrong. Or through that phoenix, through that process of fire, of crushing, of shamanic death, there's the rebirth. And this is the time we're in now.
So part of the process of this, we'll call it taking the positive road and positive step, is to acknowledge the sun with ritual and ceremony like they used to do in the past, and it's becoming a bit more popular now, honouring the equinoxes and the solstices.
Sure.
And honouring the sun in a different way, rather than, you know, just putting on sun cream to block it out, like
Sure.
actually honouring it and the energy of it.
Yeah, so you know, this is really important. Of course, the equinoxes are the balance points, and the solstices are the end points. So if it was a pendulum, for example, you know, when it swings out to here, it's a solstice. When it's midway in between the two, it's an equinox, and then back solstice. So it's this pulse, this heating and cooling. And this shift, this between day and night, this hot and cold, between winter and summer, that dynamic, those two poles create the movement. And it's through the movement, which is like the capturing of the Godhead, the dance between Sophia and this Godhead, the invisible God and the physical goddess, the way in which they interact and make love. That process is this swing, you know, the undulation of living energy as it flicks into matter and then back into spirit. And we, just like a kid, you know, with one of those wheels going down the road, we don't necessarily, that stick that we use to keep that wheel spinning, it's only a teeny bit of energy to keep it going. You know, if you had to start it with the stick, there's a huge amount of energy, but it's already spinning. And so we only need to trap these little bits of energy to drive our system, which is the body, and through the excess energy to liberate that through this path of doing our ritual, of doing our ceremony to honor and capture that energy back into the earth. So if we look at where we are in Australia with the Aborigines, they would come into a landscape and hunt and gather, and it's through that process that they would be devouring the old sunlight, so to speak. And that sunlight was already captured by a plant in its dance between it's being rooted in the ancestral world, everything that has come in the past, and then combining that with the world of light that's coming now, and then producing sugar of that time, of that moment. So consuming that energy and then singing and dancing, doing ceremony on that place would then liberate and pump that energy back into the landscape to energize it for the next cycle. And the constant process of doing that is what keeps that harmonic energy going on endlessly. So that could then flow through time for eons, could never end. You look at the short use of our culture, how quickly it's exhausted the energy of the planet because it's not connected. You know, 300, 400 years, nothing compared to 1 million or 1 billion years. You know, so if we want something perpetual, we need to learn how to live within our means. And so this is what I call a true solar economy. The extractive industries and economies that we've built are stealing energy from here, from this landscape, from the future, you know, and exhausting it all. Whereas if we live within our solar energetic economy, we're only using the energy or less than's being captured by the landscape, by the oceans, by the forests, and processed by all those beings. And just like we dancing this dance here, the whales and dolphins, the cetaceans, are doing the same thing shamanically in the oceans, singing the oceans, swimming through the oceans, transmuting that energy, enabling the oceans to stay alive. So a lot of people have probably seen, you know, a video online of how whales, you know, as they move, are actually stirring up the ocean, but as they're eating krill, you know, and then swimming up and then shitting over here, and then that creates an algal bloom. And so in their swimming, they are actually creating fertility in the ocean. And humans do this too when they're hunter gathering, or when they're doing a very specific type of agriculture, like permaculture. What they're doing is, as they live on the land, the more they live on the land, the more fertility in the soil, the more biodiversity, the better holding capacity of that piece of land to hold water, to hold living energy. That's our role as humans. So,
can I just ask, with the like the various ceremonies to honour the sun, the cycles, and the storage of the sun, what I'm feeling is like the plant next to you, for example, is another way that we can honour the energy that's coming from the sun through the plant world, especially with the plants that have special molecules and energy in them to help us to acknowledge the cycles and the life force. I mean, absolutely, yeah. So what role do you think these ceremonies, with using the plant medicines and also more recently the Bufo alvarius toad, what role do you think that has in bringing about we'll say a shift in the way that we see and value life on this planet?
A vital role, especially in what we loosely calling the Western culture, that is disconnected from this living energy, disconnected from the earth, disconnected from the sun, to the point that we perceive the sun as dangerous, when in fact it's our source of living energy. That you could call it that mind control turns us against the very lifeblood that sustains us. So when you have, and you know, there's certain cultures, First Nation Americans, who will call this wetiko, which is like a type of psychological parasite that you could perceive the West is infected by. So the way this works is there are medicines, some of them are plants, some of them come from animals or toads like Bufo alvarius, and what they do is they will bypass the cognitive system of the parasite that has taken over the body, that enables the body to not see its interconnectivity. It enables the body or the culture to destroy the oceans and the forests, the very lifeblood. That would be like the right hand not recognizing it's connected to the left hand and going to war with the left hand. It's insane. And yet our culture is doing it. The only thing that enables them to do that is the psychological parasite that removes them or disconnects them from their brothers and sisters, the plants, the animals, the feathered ones, the scaly ones. These are all part of our greater body. So we take a certain plant like an ayahuasca or washuma, or some toad, and what that does is it bypasses the neurochemical overlay that the parasite has by plugging into our body and creating a specific neurochemistry which enables us to see the world disconnected. And it gives us a momentary window, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 4 hours in the case of something like ayahuasca, something like washuma, maybe 10, 12 hours. It gives us a window of seeing the world as a human, seeing the world connected, seeing what it actually looks like. And so that then starts to deactivate the psychological parasite and then create our original way in which we should be seeing things through the eyes of compassion and empathy. So then all of a sudden, that plant is my brother. You know, that river is part of my body. Okay? Once we start to see the world in this way, we could never destroy it. It's like our kin. So the vital role that these, what they call entheogenic or psychedelic plants have to play at this time is that reconnection, is giving humans a view onto their true role on the planet, is giving humans a view that they're meant to be custodians, stewards, curators. The way this works most potently is in groups. In other words, this drinking of ayahuasca is maybe a catalyst. It may open the door. We still have to do the work. But when we do that in groups, when we have elders who then go, you know, these visions you had, this is the real world. All of this is an illusion. When we have the support of a community, then we'll find that the trauma and pain of our disconnection, which we keep trying to fill that hole through our addictive behavior, whether it's playing on a computer or a drug or alcohol or smoking tobacco in an unceremonial way, all of those addictive processes are just to soothe the trauma from not living in a connected life. So then as we start to become connected, we feel this great surge of love. We feel a great surge of inspiration and creativity. And then you'll see the blossoming of art, the blossoming of culture as we reconnect. And so these plants and toads form a very vital part of a reawakening and a reconnecting. And then it's for us to see that and then start to live our lives accordingly. And then once we do that, we get more and more energized by the birds, by the plants, by the animals, by the mineral kingdom, by the bacteriological kingdom, and they all start to speak to us, and they're all singing the same song. And that song is the song of light or love or all the different ideas or words we may have for it, God or existence. Everything is singing the same song because it's all been created out of the same living energy. Let's call it love for want of a better word. You know, there's prana, there's chi, there's orgone. There's many different definitions, but it's for us to capture those words and re-energize them with the meanings we want. So recreate those lexicons. And once we can do that, then it enables us to express our roles in that movement of light as it flows from spirit into matter, and then as it flows from matter back into spirit. And with each cycle, with each pulse, we get to drive it up the spiral or down the spiral. And up the spiral we could call evolution, and down the spiral we could call it involution. And so we're at what's called an inflection point. We're at a point where we've made great sacrifices of the physical world to reach this point of trajectory for this mass liberation, for this mass awakening. Let's hope it's not in vain. But that responsibility comes down to one person, and that's you, or me. You know, It comes down to just me. In other words, we are not the ones we've been waiting for. I am the one I've been waiting for. That subtle shift means that I will sit and wait until someone else gets their shit together. Till the government sorts out the mess, until the military sorts out that war, until the pharmaceutical industry sorts out my health, you know, and it'll never happen because I'm not taking self-responsibility. So if I want to take self-responsibility, it's me that has to step up and me that has to do that. And so each one of us has the self-responsibility. Each one of us has the opportunity and the responsibility to do that now. And it's in that doing that now which we'll recognize the collapse of what we may call space-time, the collapse of energy to a point which is where we awaken to our omniscience and omnipresence and awaken to the idea that time is an illusion. And this is what all these cultures were doing. This is what they were saying. This is what their buildings show. And it's for us to take on those ideas. It's for us to dance that dance, to sing that song. And how we do that has already been given in the two most powerful things that we have left, that have all the wisdom of the ancients and the ancestors. One is our body, which is billions of years old. The continued cellular passing down from generation to generation. Not one being in my mother's ancestral lineage died before giving birth. So my mother is the survivor of the survivor of the survivor, going back till single-celled organisms, if you want. Unbroken physical lineage, and my father the same. So by the time my father and mother get together, my body is built out of two multi-billion year lineages, unbroken cellular lineages. It's super intelligent, you know. And then the spirit, the energy, the being that inhabits that body, that grows itself a body in order to walk on the earth, the union of heaven and earth is literally in the body. So we have that great teaching, is the wisdom of the body, and just watching the body and the body's intelligence and how it plugs into the body of the earth is enough for us to recreate all the wisdom traditions. But the short circuit is, of course, to look at the ancestral cultures that still live in harmony with the earth, because they have already those teachings, how to use those plants as food, as medicine, as awakening agents, as fuel, as shelter. In other words, they have the traditions and the culture to show what being responsible is on the planet.
Can I ask, so the ancients have had experience of working with these, we'll call them ancestral, celestial energies, either from the sun or from further afield. How do you think these energies are changing at the moment, or is it just our perception that there's more people tuning into those energies?
That's a good question. I think the energies are changing, but it's a chicken and egg thing. While we are still looking from the mind of a separated being, there's things changing out here, whether it's climate change or whether it's cosmic driven or whether it's energy from the great central sun or the seasons. It's stuff happening out here that we are just in a living matrix and being exposed to how that energy moves. But as we awaken to the times and what's happening in the times, we actually co-created. We part of those living systems. we could be seen as time travelers that have come back from the future for this time to midwife this time into this birthing of a golden age. And it's by how we awaken and carry that energy, which determines how fast and how graceful that transition is. And so if you look at the world from a social, political standpoint, from where we are now, we could see, with US elections about to happen, or what's happening potentially in Europe, we could fall into a chaos pattern of thermonuclear war, world war, death, destruction, more ecocide. In other words, a total destruction and dissolution of the living energy systems of our planet. And yet we can also branch off, because now the energy on the planet, whether it's the capturing of that through social media and energetic networks, we're actually poised to actually bypass that negative spiral and go into essentially thousands of years of peace and a golden age. What that's determined by is the awakening of us as individuals, of whether we do actually have a role and whether we're powerful in that situation. In other words, how we spend our money, how we spend our time and attention, whether we are in gratitude or honor of what has supported us and brought us to here or not.
Yeah.
All of these will determine where we use our energy, and then combined, that energy will shift this way or this way. It's kind of like a true vote.
Yeah.
You could vote for a politician, or you could vote with your money, which means if I've got a choice, do I buy this chemically grown tomato or this biodynamically grown tomato? This one may seem more expensive, but if you had to actually take into account the true costs, whether it's your health, to the earth, your children's future, even if this one costs 10 times more, it's probably cheaper than this one chemically grown one over here. And so we need to make those decisions as individuals right now and take that self-responsibility. And if not, then we will kick off a negative spiral.
So there's lots of things that we can do on a personal level. You mentioned a few. And so
there's only things we can do on a personal level.
Yeah.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
Trying to fix the bigger picture out there until we healed is exemplified through any spiritual traditions or the Bible, about casting the mote out of your eye before you try and judge a situation. All of the change is happening internally. All of the change is made by your choices and your decisions right here, right now. So there is only ultimately our self-responsibility, and that's why we can look around, and any culture that supports self-responsibility is ultimately a pro-life culture. Any culture that does not is an anti-life culture. So you look at our culture. Does it support you taking your health into your own hands and becoming self-responsible with your health? Does it support you taking your economy or the Earth's economy into your own hands or giving it up? You can take each one of the services or the governmental services that we have as a culture and see that what they do is they remove more and more self-responsibility. In other words, that culture is what you call an anti-life culture. There have been many, many before that have risen and fallen. We're standing on the bones of many of those cultures that have come and gone. And so if we want to move forward into a pro-life culture, then we need to awaken and plant forests.
Yeah, and so tuning into the elements, into nature, and even the ancestors too, must be a way of helping us to create that pro-life culture, because that's the life system that we need to operate with, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Surely, you know, like, you know, if you have the opportunity, and I'm not suggesting you go out and do this, but if you had the opportunity to maybe get in touch with a brain chemical that your body is already in your body called 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine. This is one of the most powerful brain chemicals known to humans. And if you can activate that in your body, it can give you an experience of unity consciousness, of connectedness, of awakening. And even though that may be a very short window of time, that may be enough of a spark to start the fire in you of awakening, because once you've seen the overall arc of your life, of your culture, of the planet being expressed, in other words, what your actions, how they will unfold into the world, into the cosmos, and we see that this one creates karma, this one creates karma, this one here is graceful. If we could see that, we would choose that every time. And so the awakened being, the awakened cultures before us have seen that, and therefore guided their people down those paths or up those paths.
Yeah. So they've got the shamans and the wisdom keepers within the tribe to be able to show the people, okay, you know, we need to give honour to the clean water and honour to the sun. And
absolutely. So those are encoded in their ceremonies, in their carvings, in their song, in their dance, in their costume. All of that is a celebration of life, a celebration of this never-ending lovemaking between the sun and the earth, of which we are part of that organ. We're part of the lovemaking organ between the processing of light and the return of the physical stuff, the children of light, back to the source of the light. And so it's this never-ending dance. And if we do our jobs correctly, there's abundance for everyone. You know, take for example, overpopulation. It's not an actual issue of too many people. It's an issue of bad land management. If people were connected, there would be abundance for everyone. But it's in that awakening, in that wisdom traditions, they would have less people because they would be having children in accordance with that true solar economy, with how much their environment could support. Not outgrow your environment, so you've got to go and steal your neighbor's environment or mine here or extract over there. But you would be living to the productive capacity of the land, which can be upgraded almost infinitely. But it has to grow within, organically, it's got to grow within the realms of that energy exchange. You know? A human mother won't give birth to 12 children because her body probably can't support it, right? So there are limits. Over time, it's unlimited. So if I had a seed, within that one seed, let's say it's a lotus seed, within that one seed is an infinite number of lotuses. Out of that seed can unfold lotuses and lotuses, continuing on and on forever. So that one equals infinity. Now, in that first season, it may only grow one lotus with 100 flowers, each with 20 seeds. But you can see as time goes on, the amount of energy from that lotus is infinite. And so as long as we're going at the right pace, at the right movement, and everything goes to this movement, the seasons, the flows.
So it seems like we're pretty out of whack with those seasons
Absolutely.
and flows at the moment.
We're disconnected, you know. We disconnect from the light. We sit in an office. We're working, you know, under artificial blue light, which is affecting our mitochondria It's affecting the way in which our body can literally absorb light directly from the sun and power itself up. And then the more we disconnect, the more dependent we become on our food. The more damaged our food, the more we become dependent on getting more and consuming more, but consuming more and getting less. And so obesity, diabetes, immune system breakdown. So the bodies are literally telling us there's a short circuit. We need to reconnect. And sunbathe, stand barefoot on the earth, breathe, eat nutrient-dense food, hang out with people who share that living vibrational energy with you. Form groups, cultures, form relationships with with the plants, with the microbes, with the animals. Our ancestors have been doing this for thousands of years.
With the medicinal plants as well.
Sure. So we start that digestive process outside the body. If we were growing wheat, we'd grind that wheat and would feed it to a yeast culture that would digest it, and then we would digest that. In other words, there's all these layers of living energy, of beings folding into beings and folding out of beings. Our body is a whole colony of different beings. And until we recognize that it's a colony, and treat it accordingly, then we're going to treat our greater body, which is the earth, the same way. Something wrong, we'll just kill it. We'll just smother that. And how do we expect it to keep supporting us and giving us life if we treat it as if it's an us and them, like a war? And so the advent of, penicillin, although it's the natural way in which our greater body deals with overgrowth of certain energies. So for example, if there's not enough oxygen in a system, it goes what's called anaerobic, and you can get pathogens. Pathogens or parasites are potentially just beings which are forced into a situation because of scarcity, right? And humans can act like parasites. So if you've got people living in a slum, they may end up, turning to violence or drug addiction, robbery. They doing that out of desperation. Given the right circumstances, they would act like symbiotes, not like, parasites. And so the mushrooms, which are the great beings that break down systems at the end of this living system, then you'll have fungi and molds, and they'll start to break down that tissue and liberate it for regrowth into other beings, right? And because they're living in that rottingness, they have to create chemicals to stop themselves being eaten. And so they produce these exudates, which become some of our most powerful medicines. One of those exudates made from a slime mold is called penicillin. But if we overuse that, we will create too much death in our colony, and then that barren ground allows more so-called weeds and more overgrowth of other things, and then we've got to try come back into balance. And so we need to work out how to harmonically do this, and this is exactly the sort of things that our ancestors were doing. That's how they got here. That's how we got here. Thousands of years, of generations, thousands and thousands of knowing how to communicate with plants and animals and minerals and viruses and bacteria and fungi to give us the food and medicine that we need. Of course. And the sun is, all of the forests, all of the plants are tracking that light because they know that's a source of living energy. Everything's moving to the rhythms of the sun. Everything is all of living world is part of a solar economy. It's only humans that have disconnected that think for some reason that they can grow things in a box, you know, and that will be the dissolution or the breaking down of, you know, the intelligence of the body, of the immune system.
So bringing that harmonic relationship with ourselves and with nature, is that part of your vision here at Starseed?
Absolutely.
I know you've got a beautiful iovine sitting right next to you. You know,
Yeah,
that must be a part of this process of living with nature.
Yeah, look, the closer we look, the more intelligent we realize the grand designer is and was. You know, and I say is because that design process is happening all the time, real time, and we co-creative in that design process. As we select different plants, oh, I like this apple, well, that one's okay. We driving that process. You know, if you, and I think Michael Pollan covered this in his book, you know, the movement of the small little sour crab apple from the Himalayas, you know, through, you know, Persia, Middle East, to the Americas. By the time it goes through to the Americas, this small little sour crab apple has become over 150 varieties of large, sweet apples. That's a combination between humans and apples. And that sustenance, that growing, that's the earth that we inherited, is what our ancestors cultivated and grew through time till now. And so everything that's alive, all those plants, are foods, are medicines, are awakening tools. They're all there speaking to us if only we had the ears to hear. But all of them are getting their, a large part of their primary instruction from the light. And our sun is like, it's like a local ISP. So the grand central sun is where a lot of the, let's say, the wisdom or the intelligence is issuing from. Then our sun then steps that down like a local ISP or step down transformer, to use that analogy. And then all of that radiant energy that our earth then interacts with is contemporary with all the light energy of the cosmos. And so it's taking all of that cosmic energy, which is the real-time thing of what's going on, and it's combining that with everything that has gone on, which is the earth itself. All the layers of our ancestors, the bodies that have laid down over millennia, is the, you could call it the past. That's what our trees and forests and plants are rooted in. They're rooted in the past. They're bringing up all the ancestral knowledge, all ancestral wisdom of how to stay alive, of how to thrive. And they're combining that with the light of now, and then producing, you know, the mangoes, the echinacea, the ayahuasca, that we then feeding our colony with to sustain on all those levels, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual.
So going into the ancestral levels, so is that same idea relevant to the history of the stars? That all that information that's been going on through history is coming to us, you know, via the sun, and we have access to all that exists in the universe.
With the stars, it's not history. Science has spun it in a story as if it's history, based on the idea of light moving at a particular speed. But light has two components, just like, I'm going to compare it to the heart again because it's a good analogy with the sun. If you take an ECG and you measure the electromagnetic energy that comes off the brain, you can measure it probably like an inch or two off the cranium with a sensitive instrument, and it'll measure the bioelectromagnetic field that the brain creates. You can measure the field that the heart, as a cognitive organ, creates, roundabout at the tips of an outstretched fingertip. In other words, you know, maybe 6 feet. the diameter. Now, so that's a much bigger field. But when the heart goes into a particular quantum field, a particular type of coherent, entrained field, which we call love, that is measurable, maybe not by scientific instruments, but by more sensitive instruments like humans and animals and plants, not only across space, but across time. In other words, if I'm sitting in Australia and my mother's in New York, and I think of her, she has the ability to feel that exact moment of me thinking, feeling that. Rupert Sheldrake encapsulated this in his theories of morphic resonance and showed how a dog could know the moment its owner left work to come home, it would sit up and maybe go to the door. How does it know that? Is it feeling that field? No, it's once that goes into this quantum collapse phase, this coherent phase that we call love in the heart, that field can be felt not only infinitely across space, but infinitely across time. In other words, backwards and forwards in time. In other words, if at any stage in our human history there was a being like a Buddha or a Christ and they awoken, that awakening process is available to you now by just tuning into that process. So those stars in the cosmos, the light, which is the myth of the living light that we're bathing in right now from our local star, let's call it. That light travels infinitely across space and time to be here now. There's no time lag. You can start to use your mind to go, oh, well, that light was emitted by that star, 20 billion years ago, and it's been traveling and getting to us. No, that's the way science looks at it in this one dimension. But there's another whole cosmic dimension that we all are part of, that knows that sunlight is current, is contemporary. That starlight is current, is contemporary, instantaneously. The beings on those systems, the awake, the love that they are sharing is available to us here now. Their radiance is the same as this radiance, is the same as the radiance that each one of us is capable of by being in love. And that radiance is felt by everyone and everything. And once it goes into that stage, it's felt by everyone and everything in every place and every time. This is how we are co-creative and essentially omniscient and omnipresent in an awakened loving state. And that's what the sun and the heart represents in mythology. So when we see our ancestors with the heart that's on fire, like a graphic of Jesus, or when we see our Mayan ancestors holding the heart up to the sun, they are not talking about holding the actual heart up to the sun. They are saying, look, this is the sun. There's the sun, this is the sun. It was through the perversion later that people would cut the heart out and hold it up, missing the story, missing that what was actually being said is that this is the sun. You know, the Chogyam Upanishad, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, talks about the sun and the moon and the stars and the oceans and the mountains and the rivers all exist in a lotus-shaped temple in your heart. You know, and so you could go, what about her heart or his heart? Yes, that too. That's the holographic nature of existence. So, you know, again, Indra's web is like there's a jewel at each crossing of the web or net. And, you know, each one of those diamonds reflects all the other diamonds. In other words, the holographic nature of existence is that each one of us is the whole. you know. And so therefore we don't need to go and change anything out there or fix that or do. All we need to do is adjust ourselves, and all other reflections adjust. And so this is the great teachings that, you know, the plants and animals and minerals, you know, have for us, is to remind us that we are all part of one living system. And so if you have the opportunity to awaken by breathing, beautiful, do it. If you have the opportunity to awaken by walking, do that. If you have the opportunity to awaken by drinking ayahuasca or smoking toad, do that. It's once you awaken, what to do now. Now we have to, you know, awaken and walk, do the walk and talk. Now we have to live as if life was valuable, infinitely precious. Now we have to live in our role, in our initiated role as the true custodians of this planet, which means we have to walk and talk. We have to sing and dance that expression which we call love, you know. And the most powerful symbol we have of that is the sun. And that is why so many of our ancestors, ancient cultures, worship the sun. And it's not worship in the way we use the word worship today, like worship an external being, like a god that's maybe a wrathful male deity over there that's going to punish you if you do bad and give you everlasting life in heaven if you do good. Not that sort of worship. The worship as in the loving dedication that we show day to day in terms of gratitude to the living system that supports us, that we would show as a baby to our mother for breastfeeding us. You know, that ongoing gratitude unfolds into grace that each one of us has the opportunity to express. And as we do it, we inspire other people to do it too. So it's through our own self-love and love of our family and our friends and our dog and that avocado tree and everything. As we share and express that gratitude and love, everything responds. And it's through that response that enables the living energy to flow through us, because what existence or nature does is it shows us that when we are in right relationship, when we are doing those particular things, then the energy flows through us and then we experience wholeness or healing. It's when we're out of sync that we experience disease, because that's nature gently going to us, you're going the wrong way, stop, don't go this way. You know, and that's what disease is. It's the intelligent living system showing us that we're out of harmony, that we're out of balance, that we're going the wrong way. And so with the right adjustment, bang, we're back on the path. That short, that kind of, sorry, not short, that narrow, graceful path, you know, that path of compassion is us living where what's best for me is best for the whole, and what's best for the whole is best for me. There's an African word called Ubuntu, and that's this, it's one for all and all for one. And you can't recognize that until you connect it, until you have this unity consciousness experience. That our ancestors may have said, you know, you go and meditate for 20 years and then you do this. And our culture cannot afford the time or the investment of energy in belief that that may happen. And so it needs the quick, hard and fast awakening molecules like dimethyltryptamine, because that gives them the flash connectivity.
And then they work with it.
Yeah, and then from that point you go, right, now what do I do? Yeah. And that's kind of been happening since the 60s. Went through a little lull, but it's firing up again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dean.
For being to the outer reaches of the universe and straight back and right here in Starseed. So
sure. And next time I'll tell you the connection between the sun and gold.
Sun and gold. That sounds like an interesting rave. And
why these cultures, like in Mesoamerica, were so enamored by gold, and the Egyptians. And, you know, if you make a mirror, the reason mirrors were sacred to our ancestors is because they were like an archetypal mythology of the reflectivity of existence. In other words, how all of this reflects who we are, our relationship to ourselves. But just to give you an idea, each reflective surface has a different vibrational energy. So gold, when polished to a mirror-like surface and reflecting the sun, when you look at the sun through a plate of gold, you'll get something else. Now, like I said, the heart is the sun. Gold is the mineral kingdom's expression of love on earth. And so when people are seeking gold, they're not seeking gold. What they're seeking, the vibrational energy of gold, which is love. And so it then works its way through living systems. And when we understand that gold is like the excretion of a system in love, then we will seek gold for the different reasons we seek it now. We're seeking it now because we want the love, right? When we recognize that the source of love is ourselves, it will enable us to seek the gold to express our love for the sun and the creative energy. And then it'll become an adornment and a vibrational way for us to connect between the heavenly and the earthly realms.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like we could go into that to some depth as well.
Sure.
We might save that for when I come back from Mexico.
Perfect. That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dan.
Cool.